This morning, I have the great pleasure of speaking to you about Bayard Rustin, a person almost erased from our history until recently. Rustin was not a member of Phi Beta Kappa, nor was he a member of Congress. Rustin did not even associate with the Hollywood elite. While none of these things, Rustin was perhaps the most important, if forgotten, organizer in the Black struggle for civil rights and social justice for all people. Rustin, born March 17th, 1912, in Westchester, Pennsylvania, was raised by his grandparents, who were Quakers. This is where he learned the value of nonviolent protest. Being Quaker for African Americans during the 20th century was quite unusual. He attended historically Black University Wilberforce in Ohio, but he was dismissed after leading a student revolt against the cafeteria food on campus. Many of us can relate. He would later graduate with a BA from the City University of New York. The primary reason why Rustin was ostensibly cut out of history is his being openly homosexual. The recent Netflix movie called Rustin depicts the trouble, and Reverend John spoke about good trouble earlier with the children. Rustin always got into being both Black and gay. This was his identity. When he traveled to the Jim Crow South, he was met with violence if he did not give up his seat on the bus to someone white. But just as insidious was the trouble that he, as a queer Black man, faced with other Blacks and civil rights leaders at that time. Rustin was primarily an initiator and organizer of the March on Washington, August 28th, 1963. Over 250,000 people attended that march. This is also where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. made his famous speech, "I Have a Dream." The march is also credited with the passage of the Civil Rights Movement, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. However, Rustin was relegated to the back of the march because King succumbed to political pressure. It is well known that Adam Clayton Powell, another Black leader at that time, was going to falsely tell people that King and Rustin were lovers if King did not stop Rustin's involvement with the march. King complied, and King complied with Powell's demands. This tactic is still in play, whereby someone LGBT is sometimes still vulnerable to political and social whims. But today, Rustin is receiving the recognition he richly deserves. Much of this is the result of his longtime partner, a much younger and Caucasian gentleman who is now 75 years old. He continues to seek the justice for Rustin, and in his words, the struggle continues. I conclude my remarks by reading a poem by Keith Boykin, a Black gay activist and attorney who read in 2000, and I adapted this poem in 2018 for my friend's same-sex marriage. The name of the poem is called "I Speak Today," and again was given at the Millennium Watch in 2000, Washington, D.C. I'm going to have Reverend John, if you could stand here. If you could stand here, just for support, appreciate that. I'm going to try to get through the poem. You can do it. Okay, let me pull it together. I speak today as one Black man. I speak because Barbara Jordan. I want to help. Okay. I speak today because Barbara Jordan, Langston Hughes, and the Reverend James Cleveland could not speak, and Aretha Franklin and my Aunt Gloria are both gone. I speak to articulate my unconditional love for my friends who are getting married, but I also rise to recognize many of our Black gay brothers and sisters who still are oppressed and live in communities around the country where being their authentic selves can be life-threatening. I speak for myself, but I also speak for my friend Terrence, a well-educated Black man who could not be here today because he died 15 years ago from a lack of health insurance for a controllable condition. I speak to stop the violence from Wyoming to Oakland and all points in between, yes, Texas as well. I speak to tell Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani to keep their bags packed because they will not be living in the White House for another term. I speak knowing that the right wing may vilify me, closeted gay men may deny me, and religious demagogues may decry me. I speak to tell Jesse Helms and Trent Lott and Strom Thurmond, your days of division are numbered, even in death. I speak because two Black gay men or two Black gay women who share their lives together deserve at least the same rights as two heterosexual strangers who met last night on primetime TV. I speak because James Baldwin, Lorraine Hansberry, Bayard Rustin, Andre Lord, Glenn Burke, and Aretha Gibson, and Bessie Smith could not be here. I speak because Martin Luther King and Huey Newton might support my cause. I speak so that my silence will not be interpreted as complicity, my concerns not discarded dismissively, and my thoughts not represented simplistically. I speak because Coretta Scott King, Cornel West, Michael Eric Dyson, and Nelson Mandela have uplifted me. I speak because my sheroes and my heroes and other good people of conscience have chosen not to speak. Therefore, I speak to give voice to their concerns. I speak because, like Fannie Lilhammer, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. I speak to remind you and myself that I can hold my partner's hand in Anacostia or Harlem or South Central or Oakland if I choose. And I'm not always found in DuPont Circle or Christopher Street or Santa Monica Boulevard or the Castro. I speak because not all Blacks are straight and not all gays are white. I speak to honor RuPaul, Sapphire, Bill T. Jones, Alice Walker, and June Jordan. I speak to honor my mother, Jeanette McFadden Johnson, who supported her Black queer son. I speak to enter these names indelibly in the history book of our gathering today. I speak because Andre Lord warns that my silence will not protect me any more from the anti-gay forces than it will from the anti-Black forces. I speak because my friend Rochelle Davison would have loved to be here, and that AIDS is still not over. I speak so that a Black family can get a home loan and a Black man can simply get home.
Without getting arrested.
I speak because I cannot stand the word queer and feel excluded from the word gay. I speak so that Black leaders will not forget us and Black and gay leaders will learn to work with us. I speak so that white gays and straight Blacks will no longer make decisions that affect us without including us. I speak to declare that Black men loving Black men is no longer a revolutionary act, but an everyday occurrence, an occasion. I speak to tell you that I refuse to be the only Black person in any meeting at any time, at any point, ever again. I speak so that I can get a taxi, not just when I leave my friend Wayne and Steve's house, but when I leave the White House or leave a Russian Hill home after a fabulous affair, or any house on any street, that I will be judged, or that I will not be judged by the color of my skin. I speak so that the famous rappers and Black athletes and writers and hip hop heroes on the down low may one day decide to speak as well. I speak so that all Black lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender teenagers will one day be allowed to live peacefully in their own families. I speak not to get my place at the table, but to demand a whole new table arrangement that welcomes all who have been excluded. I speak not to gain privilege, but to challenge the whole concept of privilege. Finally, I speak to offer a choice between love and fear. I speak because love is positivity, abundance, and truth. I speak so that one more Black, gay, or straight man or woman may find the courage to rise up in church and challenge a minister who spews out the vicious bile of religious-based homophobia. I speak because Andre Lord tells me, when I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, then it becomes less and less important whether I am afraid. I speak today as one proud Black man. Thank you.
Rustin, it is quite certainly that we observe a moment of quiet, silent meditation. Amen. Oh, Richard, as the reaction of the congregation makes clear, your words virtually embody the mission of this people to each of us to live our own sense of the sacred, to demonstrate transforming love, and to live with courage. That poem, which you say was first read at the Millennium March for Equality on the Mall in Washington in 2000, where, by the way, an estimated 500,000 people showed up, included me. Good. I was honored to be the only non-gay religious leader who addressed that crowd. And the first thing I said was, how many of you have ever been in a Unitarian Universalist meeting house? And you know, I asked them to stand or raise their hands, and 3/4 of them did. Because so many people have come into the inclusive circle of our faith, one way or another, for a meeting, for worship, for hospitality, a protest. I told them, please know that there's at least one religious group that's behind you and the quest for equality 100%. I didn't have anything to do with organizing that march. I understand that some Black and indigenous GLBT people actually rose up in protest and said, look, we need to be at the table. I simply responded to the invitation that honored me to speak. But in the decade that followed, during the Great Recession of 2008, for example, when groups like Occupy Wall Street or Occupy Oakland arose, I kept reflecting on how real change needs organization. Some of the young at those protests seemed to disdain the very idea of organization, echoing the Depression-era comedian Will Rogers, who said, I don't belong to any organized party, I'm a Democrat, small d. In my humble opinion, that kind of neo-anarchism never really moves the needle forward. In this year of 2024, God knows democracy feels more fragile than ever, as it did during the last era of global fascism. Recently, I've been reading about a Unitarian minister in Kansas City, Missouri, at All Souls Church there in the 1930s, who's seeing the rise of authoritarianism both here in the United States and overseas, organized a group called Friends of Democracy, one of the earliest anti-fascist movements here in the United States. During the same era, Unitarian minister and social ethicist James Luther Adams, a tremendous influence on me, was developing his conviction that what we in the liberal religious tradition are most called to do is to support what he called the power of organization and the organization of power, to serve social justice, to use the skills of voluntary commitment, which we embody in our congregational life, more broadly in the wider world, to help develop what Dr. King called beloved community. 15 years after that Millennium March, in 2015, I found myself in Selma, attending the 50th anniversary of the March to Montgomery that led to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. You may know that 3 people died in that effort. I mentioned young Jimmy Lee Jackson, beaten and shot by state troopers for helping his grandmother register. It led Unitarian minister James Reeb to heed Dr. King's summons to come help him, and he was beaten to death in Selma by white supremacists. It led UU lay volunteer Viola Liuzzo from our church in Detroit to come and be a volunteer driver for Black organizers going back and forth between Montgomery and Selma. She was shot by a Klansman. All of this after UUA President Dana McLean Greeley, I had his image up there earlier, at Dr. King's request, organized the interfaith leaders of our country, Jewish, Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, to all come and march arm in arm across the Pettus Bridge with him. In 2015, I was interviewed in the middle of that bridge by some young white college activists who wanted to know not only why I was there. I told them to watch the great PBS documentary, Eyes on the Prize. which was produced by Henry Hampton, who as a young Black man was the UUA's public relations director during the Selma campaign. They then asked me about the differences between that era and the present. And my reaction was to pull out my cell phone and say, well, because they didn't have these, they planned well in advance. They organized, they held meetings, they strategized, they had legislative goals. Occupy never managed any of that. It named a problem called inequality. It failed to name specific solutions. So it didn't make any enduring difference. For a decade in between those two events, from 2002 to 2012, as you probably know, Richard, I served as national co-chair of Freedom to Marry. At first, I was the only non-gay person in that room, strategizing about how to win equal marriage for same-sex couples. I think few people, even in our own midst, realize how integral UU support was to the success of that effort, one of the most rapidly successful civil rights campaigns in our history. The lawsuit Goodrich versus Massachusetts, which brought the first successful lawsuit, was brought by 6 couples in the Boston area, 5 of them UUs. Initially, communities of color were pretty reluctant to get on board with GLBT rights. Then Congressman John Lewis endorsed our effort. He was the first prominent leader of color to do so. Saw it as a basic civil right. And soon, Coretta Scott King joined him. I was chair of the nominating committee for the effort and was able to recruit Gloria Chavez, Cesar Chavez's daughter, to join the steering committee. And also Fred Garcia, a gifted UU layperson, one of the country's top communications consultants, who helped us hone the message, saying things like, I hear you talking about rights. Have you tried the word fairness? People hear it differently, you know. And when a white supremacist and misogynist burst into the UU church in Knoxville, Tennessee, with a shotgun, no less, and a manifesto saying that he wanted to kill as many liberals as he could, he came to the right place. And he did kill 2 people, but was wrestled to the ground by others. The minister was asked by the press if he felt that that man should be given the death penalty. And Reverend Chris Bice, my successor in that church, simply said no. We UUs are against that. We have been standing on the side of love for decades, and we're not going to stop now. Today, the UUA public advocacy campaign called Standing for Love. What did I do with my clicker? I'll leave it over here. Oh well. Oh, I know. I put it down here. Yeah. Side with love. It's still organizing against oppression and threats to democracy and human rights. Tomorrow, MLK Day, begins its 30 Days of Love campaign that will culminate on Valentine's Day. I urge you to check it out. I know in this day and age, many of us, in the face of so many adversities, can feel powerless, even succumb to despair, which is unworthy of us as people of faith. Because what is true is that each and every one of us has power. And we demonstrate that and encourage one another in the very power of our being. What is required of us is that we liberate the power of love that is within us. And through the power of organization and the organization of power, work to bring about that beloved community for which we all yearn. As Reverend Bonnie ended her dialogue last week with Reverend Wako Hickey, quoting Cornel West, so do I. Justice is what love looks like out in public. To which I would ask, could the people say amen? All right, then let's sing.